Hello and welcome to this episode of Pláticas with the Maestros. My name is Fernando de Veras with Latinx Parenting, and today I'm really excited to share with y'all a conversation that I recently had with two men who have greatly influenced the work that my partner Leslie and I do here at Latinx Parenting, and whose work has transformed literally thousands of lives all around the world. Maestro Jerry Tello and Luis J. Rodriguez. Maestro Jerry Tello is a father, a grandfather, a community servant, a therapist, an award-winning author, co-founder of the National Comadres Network, and is considered an international authority on culturally based health and healing. And Luis J. Rodriguez is a father, grandfather, great-grandfather, mentor, community peace activist, award-winning author, and co-founder of Chucha's Centro Cultural in the San Fernando Valley. And there's so much more that I could say about these men. They've both been doing incredible work for decades now. And if you want to learn more about that, you can check out the details in the description. During our conversation, we talked about manhood, cultural identity, what healing looks like, and what we can do to show up for our communities during critical times like what we're living through right now. So without further ado, please enjoy this plática with Maestro Jerry Tello and Luis J. Rodriguez.
All right. So first off, I just want to say, sincere thank you to both of you for taking time. I've learned about your work only recently. I wish I'd learned about you guys earlier in my life when I was in high school or middle school, but I'm glad that I learned about you guys when I did. And yeah, I want to just, again, thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge, your experience, and your wisdom with us here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank
So
you.
I want to give y'all just a quick runway to share about your work and whatever it is that you'd like to let people know. For people who might be hearing about you for the first time, if you'd like to introduce yourself. So maybe we could start with Maestro Jerry Tello. Go ahead.
Well, blessings, everybody. Thank you all for listening. I want to begin just by thanking Creator and ancestors for another day of life. And I'm sitting on Tangwa, Gabrielino land, and want to just acknowledge the relatives there and that legacy of what that means to us as we do our work and move forward. Myself, my dad is Jorge Perez Tello. He is Tapilan, Coahuitecan, and Mexicano that comes from Yanaguana, or commonly known as San Antonio, Texas. And we have relatives that go all the way up through Aguascalientes that way. And my mom, Maria Susolaga Ramos, is from Juarez. So Tarahumara, that we're connected that way, Luis, and relatives. And both my parents came from 14 and 15, so large families, a lot of kids, always a baby crying, noisy house. Muchos chavalos. The focus is children, but some of us were born in San Antonio. Then the work moved to Cali, and I was raised in Compton and Watts. So I grew up in Compton, Watts in the 50s and 60s. There's a whole lot of stories, a whole lot of teachings that go with that. With those. But presently, I want to acknowledge my compañera Susana, who really carries the medicine. She's the our mamas, our grandmas, our tias, the feminine really, have been the center of everything and why we're here. So I want to acknowledge her and just acknowledge, we have 5 kids and 7 grandkids. And a lot of people call me Tio, and now they call me Tata because I'm, gray hair and shit. So, but really, just been trying to do creator's work, and it bobs and weaves, in terms of what I thought I was going to do and what I ended up doing. It's always been about community and about helping and healing, but the creator and sometimes community put certain things in your path, and you follow that. And I want to acknowledge my brother Luis here, who we've been on this road together a long time, and we don't get to spend a lot of time together, but as I travel, I hear of his work and see people that have been influenced by your work, brother. And just appreciate you for who you are and your relatives and all that you've done to help our people that way, and we're still doing it. Yeah, canas y todo, we're still doing it. Still trying to do it in a good way. So let me pass the palabra to my brother here, Luis.
Gracias, La Chocomati. Yeah, we have some connections, me and Jerry. The Raramuri, Tarahumara roots, Chihuahua, very important for me, and but also the Watts roots, because the first community we moved to was Watts when I was 2 years old, from the border, from Ciudad Juarez, and I was there till about 8, and then in my 20s I moved back there. My oldest kids were born when I lived in South LA, Watts. So we have those connections, which I think are important. I think that what I want to emphasize is my work that I've done with so-called troubled men, because I was a troubled man. I mean, the thing is, as flawed human beings, some of us have to reckon with it. I've had a lot of reckoning with my flawedness, with my faultiness, with my mistakes and errors. I've had to reckon with it a lot, and I've written books about it because I think it's my own personal reckoning, but I think it's about all of us trying to face up to that mirror that we have to look at. And I've had to look at it. I started doing the barrio peace work in the 70s when it was a dangerous time to do it. And in fact, the police were our biggest enemies at the time. The sheriff's deputies were the ones that were trying to undermine our barrio peace work. That I was also connected with the Barrio Warfare Coalition and a lot of other things that got really, really big for a while, and then it all died. But the worst part was that it got infiltrated by police informants and people. And we lost in my little circle, my barrio peace circle, three of our men that were involved were killed by police. And I got threatened and everything. So I went through all that. And then I picked it up when I was sobering up as a man. No, I started doing prison work 45 years ago, 1981. My mentor was Manasar Gamboa, who anybody knows him, knows his work out of LA, but also in Long Beach. He helped me get into the prisons, and I've been doing it for 45 years. And that was very important because even though I go to women's prisons and I go to a lot of juvenile facilities, mostly I go to men's prisons, and I've been going in there. And even though I do like creative writing and poetry, I've done healing circles, but even my creative writing brings in healing. There's no way I can do it. It isn't just where you're going to learn how to write. That's part of it, but you're going to learn how to, dejar algo. Las cargas que tienes, dejarlo en el mundo, dejarlo en otro lugar. It's important for people to know they don't have to carry all those pains. They carry them and then they can't let them go. They become corpse that hold them down. They're carrying like these dead things. And you can tell when you look at them and their spirits held down by these corpses that keep hanging on and helping them to let them go because their traction, they got no traction. You can see it, you can feel it. And in the prisons, you see it and feel it a lot. So my work was always about that. I also want to acknowledge the work I did with Michael Mead. I've been doing that for over 30 years at the Mosaic Men's Conferences that we've been doing in Mendocino. I brought a lot of gangs from Chicago and then the LA area and other places. And we had to bring in inner city youth to these men's conferences that for a long time were just white people. But when we brought real black and brown people who were going through hell on earth, it changed the whole dynamic. And I've been doing that with him, and I really respect Michael Mead's work. And I work with people like Maladoma Somé from the Dago tribe in West Africa, and then Jack Cornfield, the Buddhist, a lot of people that came through there. I just want to mention that work. And then just to add the work that we're doing at the Chucha Centro Cultural. A few years ago, I helped start the Trauma to Transformation program, which is, I've been training these young artists, poets, theater people, artists to go into the juvenile halls and prisons. And now they've been doing it for several years. So trauma transformation is now in a couple prisons. We're in the juvenile facilities. We're in parolee housing. So we're continuing that work that I started 45 years ago. We'll continue with a whole new cadre of young people.
Luis, if I can, as you're talking, we both came from that area, Compton, Watts area in those times. And I was sharing with some folks yesterday that, as I was speaking in Modesto, that my body is reverberating with some of the things that happened to me when I was a child. That we used to live across the street from the elementary school there in Watts on 154th and Central. And we'd go to school, little child go to school, and we're there playing on the schoolyard. And then we see some of the kids go to the fence. So you go see what they're doing, going to the fence, and you go to the fence, and then you hear one of your friends crying, right? And they're crying, and they're your friends, so you go hug them, and you see they're crying because the migra or the policías come and picked up one of their relatives, their dad or their mom or their tia, and they're crying heavy, and so you're holding them, and you feel their body and you feel their pain, but then the bell rings, and you got to go in the class and turns to page 47, and where do all those feelings go? Where does all that trauma go? Where does all that susto go, And so I remember, those times that it reminds me right now. We're going to talk about that probably a little bit later, but it reminds me. And I think, going through all of that and seeing the injustice and seeing the cops, that would pick us up. And you remember this, they would pick us up, take us to another barrio, drop us off just to laugh at us, just to do, chicken shit stuff like that. And, and seeing, my brother get hit on and getting locked up and, all that stuff, and so when I, then got through that, by the grace of a lot of abuelita's prayers and my mother's, wanting to please her, went on to become, to study psychology and wanted to help my people. One of the things that I realized that was really difficult is that, going through Chicano movement, you get all this fuerza, this pride and all of that, marching and, Chicano power and all of that, you get this pride. But the other thing that was hitting me is I was doing my work. I was seeing all these men referred that looked like me. They looked like my dad, looked like my tios. They were getting referred for domestic violence, for gang violence, for dealing drugs to kids in communities, for and I'm saying, shit, man, I love my people. But why are we hurting each other? Why are we destroying each other, And that became the impetus, for feeling, well, we can't wait for the system. We got to do it ourselves, And in 74, I began doing work in communities. But in 88, I brought a group of men together that had the same intent of, kind of what you were doing with Michael Meade. And we brought these hombres together, to try and figure out how we can do better programming so they weren't, because of what they were doing to our people is they're locking us up or deporting us. They're just throwing us in jail or deporting us or putting us on medication. They're jacked up, and or the guys that were coming back from Nam, they were, there was no services for them, So we came together, on a weekend and began. I was already on the Red Road and began with a prayer and all that, called the ancestors in. And what we weren't expecting is a second brother that shared, talked about he was there to help, and what he's doing as a therapist at La Fregada. But then he says, but I just want to share something. He says, I'm hurting right now. I don't know how to love my kids. I don't know how to love my wife. I'm losing my family because I'm drinking too much. I'm out there working, and he began to cry. And Luis, way back then, back in the 70s, we as men in front of each other didn't cry. We would cry at a funeral, or maybe we were tore up, but not, not straight up just talking to each other, And his brother began to cry, but then he began to share something else deeper, man. He shared that, he says, I'm going to tell you what's really going on. And he shared that he was abused as a kid, by a teacher that sexually abused. And then he began to wail, man. And when he cried, that spirit cry where you can't even talk, when he cried like that, we all started to cry. All of us 19 of us in that room. And when we realized, like you just said, we had work to do. Even though we wanted to do this work, we had to do our healing work. And that became, the beginning of the Círculo de Hombres, the National Comadres Network, and a whole aspect of work that for the last 40 years we've been doing, And so Luis and I have been walking parallel, like Nane, another parallel brother. The creators put us in these different places and do it over here, and then we come together maybe once a year, maybe twice a year to do our own healing, and then we got to go back out that way, And it's beautiful, the work that goes on, but there's so much more work to be done,
The brother Jerry has brought in some very important points. One of them had to do with, you reminded me when I was at school in Watts, and I was 6 years old. I couldn't speak any English. And so, I went to 109th Street School. So I wasn't far from what you were talking about. We lived on 107th in Avalon, and then we moved to about 3 places in Watts. We would get evicted all the time, gas being pulled out, and then we ended up 105th and McKinley. And then so I would walk over to 109th Street School, and I didn't make it kindergarten, so they put me in first grade. I couldn't speak no English, and it was rough, man, because most of the kids in that school were black. And the other parts of Watts were mostly Mexican, like the La Colonia part was mostly Mexican. That part was mostly black, but a lot of Mexicans were coming in from Mexico. And so what they did is they punished you if you spoke Spanish. And I remember when I was 6 years old, I uttered Spanish in my classroom, and a white teacher, came up and slapped me across the face in front of the whole class. I mean, I tell people this because it impacted my whole life. I didn't know it. And now I look back, I became a very voiceless person. I was silent. Now you hear me now. I said, this guy talks all the time. What happened? Well, it became the vortex, or became, how to say, the portal eventually for me to find my voice, to find language, to find books, to speak in Spanish and English, and even a few indigenous words. But the main thing is to, it made me so silent and quiet. And it's the worst thing you could have done, because then I couldn't express anything. And every time I was in trouble, I had no language for it. I had no words. And so I would rage all the time. It was violent. So even though I joined a gang, and then I was on heroin for 7 years, and all these things kind of mediate all this stuff. The most of the time I got arrested for, even though I stole and I did a lot of things I shouldn't have done, was for violent acts. And so I was on a murder's roll when I was 16. And then at 17, I was arrested for attempted murder. And then at 18, I was facing many years in prison for fighting with police officers. It was just rage, constant raging. And I have to look back and think about that, because, again, my only voice was the guns and the knives, because that's what was happening in the barrio. Then it changed. It used to be just fisticuffs, pleitos and everything. Then it became guns. All of a sudden, you see guns pop up out of nowhere. I'm sure Jerry remembers. All of a sudden, they popped up. And now, when they started drive-bys, there was no other way to fight. Maybe it was all drive-bys. Everything was drive-bys after that. And I got caught up in that world. But I think that what's important to point out is this is what happens to men when we're not able to express our multidimensional aspects of who we are, emotional and everything else. When they kill that, and they kill that at home, I remember my poor mom, pobrecita, no llores, no llores, and hombres no lloran. My mom was doing that. Forget my dad. He was just a quiet, cold, detached person. My dad didn't raise us. He was just sitting in his own quiet world, and he wouldn't really get involved, emotionally detached. But my mom was the one, no lloren, no lloren, ¿por qué lloren? Son hombres, ¿por qué lloren? And then it kind of teaches you all these things that I also learned in the schools and in the barrio. I don't know if you know, but the Chicanos were the hardest ones in the prisons. They were even up to date. There's so many people in prison now, because we didn't say much, but we acted. There was a lot of loudness in the prisons and in jails, mostly blacks and whites, but mostly a lot of noise. Chicanos weren't about the noise. They were about the doing. And that's what made them the most dangerous people, because they all went through what I went through. You don't speak, you don't say nothing, you don't give nothing up, but at the same time, you act fiercely, uh, worse than others. And so you learn that, and it makes you a distorted human being. It mutates your masculinity, it mutates you as a man. And that's what I think the work me and Jerry have been doing parallel, but we intersected at times, is to help men get back to the full dimensions of who they are, so they can be fuller human beings, not be this mutated, narrow human being that they've kind of forced us to be.
Mm-hmm. Man, I'm telling you, like, I'm sad that we only have an hour and a half. And what I want to, for people who are just watching at home, again, I really recommend people check out all your books, obviously. So, and, Maestro Teo, you mentioned earlier the feminine and honoring the feminine with Maestra Susana. Were it not for Leslie, I may not have found Maestro Jerry Tello. And were it not for Natalie Gutierrez hosting her book reading at Tia Chucha's, I may not have dived deep into your work as well, Luis. So, yeah, again, for people who are watching, you guys have so much that you've lived through. Like you said, you've been doing this for decades at this point. And so, yeah, I thank you for all that you're sharing here. Um, I wanted to focus in on something that you all were both addressing here, in that the struggles that the men in our community are facing, and the ways that those struggles show up. Like, what are the conditions that create the kind of men that we see, right? Who are closed off. I think a word or term that you used, Luis, was emotionally strapped, like that they're just limited in the ways that they're able to express themselves. There was a video that I spoke on recently that was shared. It went pretty viral online from here in our city of Santana, where you just see these guys in the downtown area. This guy's got his shirt off, and he's
Yeah.
puffing up his chest, trying to start something. And I basically said, like, this is what we see when men don't learn to express themselves, when they don't learn to navigate conflict without having to throw fists out. And the unfortunately on social media you don't get very much time to expand on these ideas, right? You got 2 minutes to catch people's attention, but the comments were filled with people saying it's not that simple, and I agree. It's not as simple as just saying we need to tell men to be better. Like there are environmental conditions, there's historic conditions. So I want to hear from both of y'all a little bit. Number one, what are some of those like principles and core values that you feel that men in our community are lacking? You know, I think that both of y'all really emphasize the importance of like palabra and other kinds of values that we need men to live by. But then also, what can we do collectively as a community to help men to be able to tap into that part of themselves, to become their authentic selves? So I'll pass it off to Maestro Jerry Tello if you want to start us off.
Well, what comes to mind is my father. You know, when we talk about men and what we see, and as a little boy looking at my dad and all my tios and how they carried themselves, and I didn't understand, why my dad was a loud talking man. He talked like that all the time. He was, my friends said, your dad man, that's the way he is all the time. And my dad was just loud talking, and I kind of trip as a if we go into therapy, you would say, well, he's got unresolved trauma, he's got needs anger management. That's when my dad was good. When my dad was talking loud, he was good. When he got quiet, that's when we worried, because there's something else going on. And so even the projections of what we see as dangerous, not dangerous, people get afraid of us when we're talking loud. Sometimes we're talking loud because we got a lot of expression, a lot of, cariño. So expressing ourselves big doesn't always mean violence, doesn't always mean unresolved trauma. But I wondered about that. For many years, why, and as Luis said, his dad was, kind of off to the side, and I work with so many youngsters and so many men that are kind of like that. Either they're one way or the other, either getting, quiet, they do their work and they don't do nothing else, or they're real aggressive and, I was in my own development, when my dad died when I was 13, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with those feelings, because in the barrio, I mean, and it was interesting because I was speaking at a conference recently on trauma, unresolved trauma, and grief, and there's all these psychologists that were speaking before me and talking about the real aspect of men and boys is they need to be able to emote and share their feelings and do all of that stuff, and if they could just share when trauma comes up in their life and share, then they're going to be better off. And and when I went up there, I said, what? If I were to cry as a kid every time some shit happened in the barrio, I'd be crying 24/7. I mean, there's always something going on in the neighborhood. So you can't cry about everything. I mean, but you need a place, but you can't do it all right there, because you'd be crying about everything, man. And so when my dad died, I didn't. And even one of my camaradas, hey, I'm sorry, man. And that's the way it is. You play it off, he was sick. I mean, and I didn't grieve that for a long, long time. But I still, as part of my search to heal and understand manhood, I was talking to my tío one day, and my tío, I was asking him, so why is my dad so, sometimes so brusco, so hard? And I said, well, things happen. I said, no, but what makes, what made my dad like that? And he shared with me that when they grew up, in Texas, they used to go ride bikes, and during they would leave in the morning, and as long as you're home by the time the lights came on, you were good, And so they went off into this forest area where they're playing with bikes, and they heard some rustling and some noise, and they looked through the trees, and they looked through the trees, and they saw the Texas Rangers, who are the law enforcement in Texas, right? And these Texas Rangers had 3 men, one African American and 2 Mexicanos, and they're getting ready to hang them, right? And he says, and then they heard us, and they turned around, and we got scared, and we ran away. He says, but something happened to my body when I saw them, and those ropes around the men's neck, and he says, and we got scared, and we rode home, and he went to his house, and I went to my house, and we didn't talk about it, and we didn't say nothing. He says, but I know I couldn't sleep all night. And then I went the next day to go get your dad to play, and he was punished because he peed in bed. And he got in trouble. And next time I saw him, he told me, "You better not say nothing. You better not say nothing. What happened?" You know. And so, what do you do with that? What do you do with those feelings? What do you do with the shame? What do you do with the reactions? What do you do? Because you don't want to make your mom feel bad either. You don't want to, they're not going to let you play no more. You can't go out. I mean, and what we know historically is when the conquistadors came over, there was a process by which they would take the weak men, so-called weak men, and either castrate them, give them a prefrontal lobotomy, or kill them. So you better act like you tough, fool. You better not be you better not be showing emotions, right? And if you got little boys in your house, no llores, hey, levántase, hey. Not, there's a historical sense about, what is valued in this very, if you will, patriarchal, misogynistic world about power. That in the disenfranchised world that we live in, you got to survive, dude. And so, I share that because there's a legacy there, that we have to deal with. On the other hand, and I'll at least leave more room for Luis to talk. On the other hand, I saw some very, very honorable men in my community that stepped up, that worked hard, 2 jobs, hombres de palabra. Not only Mexicano, African Americans, we would greet each other. Hey, brother, what's up, man? How you doing? Help each other. People needed food. You helped each other. Men helped each other. And in the barrio, right? The principal goal many times of the clicas was to protect the neighborhood, was to protect that nobody came in to hurt the women. Nobody came in to hurt, Later on, it shifted, as Luis said, when crack came in, and after the Vietnam War, and they had trained a lot of people, in military warfare and all that, then the automatic weapons came. That changed a whole lot of stuff, But, we have a whole number of things in the Compadres Network that we teach across the nation about, what is un hombre noble, what is sacred manhood. Now, I can talk more about that now, but you asked about the legacy. You asked about the history, and I just want to, put a little bit of that in, and then maybe I can talk a little bit about what we talk about what sacred manhood is. I want to pass the palabra to Luis and let him add.
I want to talk a little bit about those guys that you had shown. They were getting up and puffing up, and I do think it's a complicated thing. It obviously is. A lot of that is men. It's like a rooster, You have to show. I don't mind men being tough. I mean, people have an issue with that. You have to toughen up as well. But the problem with being tough is most toughness is actually weakness. Real tough men, it's like Jerry's talking about. There's some tough men. They work hard. They take care of their families. They will step up. You know what I'm saying? But a lot of toughness that I've seen in the pinta or in the street is really a lot of weakness shown as tough. So when I see a man puffing up, you have to evaluate it kind of quickly. Is this really a weak man trying to prove himself? Or is this really a tough guy? Most tough guys aren't doing that. You know what I'm trying to say. But what I mean by being tough doesn't mean that women can't be tough. Women are tough. Mothers are tough. There's some women tougher than any man I know. Being tough is important. And I tell people that even if you grow up to be tough, like I had to be tough in the jails and juvenile halls and everything else, you don't really lose that. You can't lose your toughness. But what you do is you kind of spread out what you draw on. It isn't just, I'm going to be this person. You draw on a lot of qualities that you have. We have a lot of qualities. So a lot of what people have been saying, well, you got to learn how to regulate, because regulating, it's part of it, knowing how to regulate yourself, your emotions. And I take it to another level. I tell the men in the pintas and even other guys, and it's really a level of mastery, because it's not just regulating. You have to have mastery over your life, because you really are the only master of your life. If not, other people will master it. You know what I'm saying? You have to be the master. Otherwise, you look at other people. When I put myself in the gang, part of me was trying to be away from the hypocrisy and BS of the system, the schools, and the family, But then I found out that there's a level of hypocrisy in the gang, and then I have to address that I don't want to be part of that. You know what I'm saying? And so then you have to think about, well, what do I need to be? What's my mastery? Do I have to? It isn't just regulating; it's mastering my emotions, my feelings, my thoughts, my art, my gifts, everything I have. How do I master it? So I'm not competing with nobody. I'm competing with myself, if anything, to be a better human being. And that includes women and men. And it's better if men can do that. Now, I want to add one thing. As you know, one of the biggest problems and why I wrote Always Running was my own son got into all this stuff. And Jerry knows Ramiro very well. And one of the good things that me and my son did is we went to a Compadres event up in Jolon. We were there one time because me and him needed to have that spirit of the sacred male in us coming in, and we needed it, and it was very powerful. We cried at that event. I don't think Jerry was there at that time, but anyway, we were there. We went through sweat and everything, and we had to go through that. Me and my son had been through a lot because my son, unfortunately, ended up with that same level of rage, even worse in many ways. He joined a gang in Chicago, which at the time in the 90s was the worst period of gang violence in LA and Chicago. The worst period. He joined a gang then that period. It was rough. He was shooting people. He got really active in it. I had all kinds of problems with him. And as you know, he ended up in a psychiatric treatment hospital for close to 4 months. It was one of the worst experiences ever. I'm telling you, do you think they would help? Are you kidding me? When he left that place, they couldn't stand him because he was raging all the time. They had him on leather restraints and on drugs all the time. I kept telling him, you guys ain't helping this kid. And sure enough, when he gets out, they told him, okay, because the insurance went out, no more money. So they let him go. So, okay, but come to the basement, we'll give you a going away party. The staff beat him up in the basement. This is a treatment hospital. I'm just telling you, this is the way things were. And I was sending him there so he wouldn't be in the juvenile detention center in Chicago, which was the largest, worst detention center in the country at the time. And I said, man, maybe he was better off there. The choices were no choices. And then soon after that, he did prison time. He did close to 15 years in prison. This is, for a dad, it's very, talk about a mirror, Am I going to be my dad? Am I going to be another dad? What kind of dad? I had to step up as a dad. It was really hard. And that's why I wrote Always Running, why I did even testify the work I was doing, why I testified the work working with gang kids, other gang youth, and everybody, because I needed to be a kind of father that my son could see by example. This is what toughness really is, not just getting a gun and shooting somebody. Because my son, the last thing he did, 13 and a half year stretch, was he shot somebody and the guy almost died. It would have been murder. He was in a hospital in a coma, and then he shot at 2 police officers. So they were going to give him 40 years to life. It's terrible when he's 21 years old. He'd already done a year and a half or something for some other stuff. And you're seeing your son, he's facing 40 years to life. It tears you up. And it makes you question yourself. But we went through it. We got him 28 years. Finally, we got a judge to give him 28 years, and he was able to get out half the time with good time. So he gets out in 14 years, but they give him 6 months off, 13 and a half years. And when he walked out of there in 2010, I told him, Miko, you don't know how blessed you are. People for far less are still doing time 20, 30, 40 years later. You're out of here 13 and a half years for what you've done. You did was really bad. It's really, I don't condone it. But look at you, all the blessings, all the comedians stepped up for you. Everybody that was there wrote letters for you, convinced the judge to give you lesser than 40 years, and then you doing that good time. And he walked out of there sober, gang-free, crime-free. He still had issues. He's been out now for 15 years. He still has a lot of issues, but he's not the same person. And I mention that because my stepping up for my son helped me become a better man myself. And watching him, but also help others. This was the big example. And I don't know, Ramiro's 50, he's going to be 51 years old now. He's a grandfather. I have great grandkids, and I'd appreciate Jerry Tello's bringing up his grandkids, but then I got 7 great grandkids. I have to point out, though, and it's part of the family issues, my granddaughter ended up in prison. One of my son's daughters, she just got out for crystal meth. It was really sad to see her there. But the sad thing is her brother, my grandson, Joshua, died of fentanyl 3.5 years ago. That was really hard. 22 years old. They found him in a hotel, a SRO hotel, 2 weeks already stinking. He was bad. they found him dead. It's like, you don't want to hear this, you don't want that to happen. So our lives are getting constantly embroiled in this, but then we also got to step up that mastery of who I am. I could have lost it every step of the way, and I had to kind of pull myself together to say, can I be the man that this situation demands? Can I step up for the circumstances that we're facing? That's what mastery is versus just regulating or just trying to maneuver through the life, navigate it through. Master your life, master your gifts, and master who you are.
Yeah, I think that speaks to there's this idea of how we address these issues in this Western ideal, in this way that we approach, where, like you said, we lock them up, we medicate them, we deport them, and those are the only solutions that we have to these kinds of problems. But we need to zoom out and say, what is the whole way? What is the holistic approach? And not just holistic again in that Western ideal, but
Mm.
in some of those stories that we don't get to talk about, some of those practices and traditions that we don't get to talk about. And I think something else that you mentioned, Luis, that reminds me of something that Maestro Tello talks about is that experience you had with your son, having to really zoom in on your own experiences and how that might impact his reflections on his experience, and then writing your books. Maestro Teo, I know you talk about like the going through the darkness and then offering that medicine to other people and helping that to serve as like a way for them to heal.
Yeah, I also want to just acknowledge, that, some people talk about generational trauma, right? And what our ancestors have gone through and how we carry that. But what Luis and I just talked about is generational trauma. That you don't heal, hundreds and hundreds of years of trauma, of disenfranchisement, of enslavement, of rape, all of that, in one generation. The residual of that, sits with your kids, sits with your grandkids, and you do the best you can. And the thing is, the hardest thing as a dad, as a grandpa, is sometimes you can't do nothing about it. You can't stop it because the emotional, spiritual damage is so deep. It's soul deep that as much as you try, you can't unravel it all. And so what we do as men, if you can be the best father, the best grandfather, is you're there when the trauma happens, when the hurt is happening for your kids and your grandkids. They slip, they fall, they hurt, and you gotta, get down on the ground with them. You gotta cry with them. You gotta, help them heal. You gotta let them know you're still sacred. I got you. We're gonna do this together. But that's not easy to do. That's not easy to do when you as a dad or as a grandpa feel responsible, and that's why we need our own healing. I mean, even Luis and I, we're still healing. We're still going through our own healing because, it's that residual effect, and, but what really comes into play, for me and for many of us, and Luis talks about mastery, is what are the values and tradiciones? What are the ceremonies? What are the rituals? What are the things that you have available to you that can keep you grounded? And that's where I feel, that is so important. That how do we reground ourselves in the traditions and values and ceremonies and rituals and valores that our grandmothers knew about? That's what got them through. What our grandpas, how do we first of all live those? Because you can't just talk about it. I mean, being un hombre noble is not just about talking about it. We do a lot of training all across the country on this, and are training other facilitators in this. And what we tell them is, you can go through this training and have this curriculum, but you got to live it. It's not just talking; you got to live it, and that's hard. Which means you got to be in your own círculo. You got to be in your own path. And one of the things that I started out with, and I want to mention, in terms of that sense of sacred manhood. Is sacred manhood really is, that sense of honoring all our relations, starting with the mujer, starting with those who gave us life, our mamas, and the female entity. Without the feminine, we would not be here. And so you have to honor the source first. So the first teaching, when we teach these boys to cross that bridge, you can't cross that bridge unless you understand that first lesson is honoring the feminine, honoring the sacredness, honoring the mujer, honoring your mama. She may have not raised you the best way. But you still need to honor. She gave you life, honoring your sisters, honoring your compañeras, honoring the feminine, But then it goes to a deeper level, honoring the feminine in you, that feminine, that emotion, that spirit in you. How do you honor that, Because that's the path to healing. The path to healing is the same way we started with the feminine. You got to go through it, And if you're not willing to go through it, then we're not really in that path of healing. And so that sacred manhood means, we have that sacred four directions, that teach us about that. That in one direction, that of the east, is said, the men are the guardian of that direction, of that, where that Tata Sol comes up. But right across from that is the west, the direction of the mujer, direction of that incloquenahuaque, that inside reflection spirit, And then in between those comes those children, the innocence, the play, the laughter, the joy. And across from that is the wisdom of the ancestors, right? So what we talk about is that sacred manhood is, yes, you acknowledge who you are and the role you carry, but what healing does is allows you the flexibility to go to the feminine and be in the feminine when you need that, to be a chavalo and have fun and laugh and be innocent at times, but also sometimes you got to call on that wisdom, and healing allows you the flexibility. Trauma keeps you stuck. That's why I see, that's why I am. It gets you stuck. It doesn't allow you the flexibility, right? It doesn't allow you the movement, the flow, right? And that's what we see, when Luis speaks, when he shares his poetry, we hear that flow. We hear the flow from the intellectual to the emotional to the spiritual, all in his poetry. That's why people, when they read his books, he has all those things in his books, and they feel all of those things. So even, reading, the books that Luis, writes, and hopefully the ones that I write too, that we take people on a journey to at least explore this. Maybe this is something you want to explore and heal a little bit more for yourself, So, it's a journey that way, I'll pass it to Paloma.
Yeah, that's something that I feel like I've definitely appreciated about dipping into this work that y'all are so, what's the word? Veterans in. Is I feel that sense in myself, being able to tap into those parts. I remember just last week, Leslie and I had a moment here in our community. We saw a gentleman getting arrested by cops on the corner, and we had to audit to make sure that they weren't roughing him up. They were trying to, twist his arm behind his back and doing all kinds of things. And the stress of that situation being there, I could feel it in my body, but you have to shut that down for a bit to be in the role that I'm playing, right? It's just making sure this guy's okay. And as soon as we step away from that and we were going out to get some dinner, I told Leslie, I was like, we're gonna sit in the car for a little bit, and I just gotta let some of that out. I let some of that steam out, and we sat and I cried for like 5 minutes just to move that through my body. But I don't know that I would have had that knowledge or that vocabulary or that tool available to me 10 years ago. What does that look like when I don't have that tool? And you just stay stuck in there, right?
Yeah, the one thing I would to say, Fernando, is all the emotions are important. And anger is also important.
Yeah.
And so you got to give it, it's like that poem by Emily Dixon, the more you starve it, the fatter it gets. You don't want to starve the anger. You actually want to feed it, but you want to feed it properly. What it is anger has a source and a destination. There's a reason why you're angry. When you see injustice, it gets you angry. But the reason why you want to take it to a proper destination or a destination where it needs to go is you really want to resolve it within yourself and somewhere in the world, because otherwise it becomes rage. Anger has eyes. Anger really knows where it's going. But when you're rage, it's blind rage. You're just lashing out. A lot of what you see in the street is rage. A lot of these cops are raging. Then nobody helps them people. And I hate to take the side of the cops, but let's just take the side of them as a human beings. Not that they should be cops. I'm totally against even the need for cops, but the idea of human beings being put in that position, we're screwing them over as they're screwing us over. You see what I'm saying? We're not helping these cops. And I know now because a lot of these cops are our gente. A lot of them are Chicanos. A lot of them are, you go to the prisons and a lot of the guards are gente. You go to the border patrol and all, are gente. They've got them all in there. And now they're raging. They're the ones hurting people, shooting people. It's our people. We're not helping them. And yet now we made them warriors against us. You know what I mean? So I think that it's important to say, anger has eyes. Where is it going? And the tears are important because part of anger also has sorrow in it. And that's what people have to understand is when there's rage, underneath all the rage is deep sorrow. If you can't get to that, your raging is going to explode. You got to get to why you're actually in the sorrow. The sorrow is like a river that keeps flowing. It needs to go and you got to flow with it. And when you go, that's where the tears come. And you realize underneath all that, there's deep sorrow. But then it needs to get to a point of a kind of a resolution that eventually becomes joy when you actually begin to see it come together in your life and in society. It's hard because society is really big. You know, there's a big giant that we're fighting. We're little people fighting big giants, but then there's ways to do that. There's ways to do it with a lot of people. You know what I'm saying? How one person becomes, the collective energies become important. But the personal energies are important so you can address it because I have a lot of issues and I don't want it to become rage in the sense I can righteous rage. People say it was righteous. Well, sure, I can justify a lot of my rage. I had shot at police officers when I was a teenager. My son did too. Luckily, nobody got hurt. Nobody got killed. I'm really glad. There's a lot of justification for that. But that's not the right thing to do. That wasn't the way to go. It wasn't the way. You know what happened when we shot at the police officers in my barrio? They arrested the whole neighborhood. There was martial law in my neighborhood. They didn't call it that. You couldn't walk into my neighborhood. Everybody had to have their IDs checked. Everybody was arrested. We shot at one police car, and there's an article that I got where they point the bullets, sheriff's deputy, here's the bullets, you know. And then we shot the helicopter down. We're one of two neighborhoods in all of Southern California that shot the ghetto bird down. Nobody got hurt, but the point was they went after us. Their rage against us was because they have arms. They got a system. It was bigger than what we could do. And I say all that because I think there's ways to struggle and fight and be creative strategically so that you can be in that fight and keep the anger without becoming blind rage. And I know that's a very difficult point to be, but I think it's very important for us to know how to do that. A lot of my poetry is rage, but it's my way, not rage, but anger. You know what I'm saying? And not rage because but it'd be right. It'd be like the words, what I'm saying is the creative way. But it's not just poetry that I do. I'm also speaking. I'm also organizing. I'm also doing a lot. It's my way of trying to be creative with my anger without becoming rage. The only other thing I want to add is one of the biggest works that we do is what my Navajo friend, Robert Yazi, who's a judge in the tribe there. I've been with the Navajo now for over 30 years. One of their elders adopted my wife, Trini, adopted my whole family. And we've been doing work with them. And they call it peacemaking. It's kind of restorative justice, only it's not, they don't use those terms, but it's really the indigenous way of transformative justice that we talk about. And they call it peacemaking because it's a way of bringing in the victims, the people that got hurt, and the perpetrators together to bring an agreement that will allow healing on both ends. And that's what Jerry's talking about. That's the work that we do. A lot of people have been accusing me. I've been hearing people saying, Luis Rodriguez protects predators. You know, I've heard this in the street. I don't know who's saying that, but people are saying to people, hey, did you know that it's not protecting predators, it's working with them through a healing process so that they don't hurt nobody. The work that me and Jerry do with some of these hardcore people, including people who have hurt women, domestic violence and terrible pain, as well as murders, is so that they won't ever hurt anybody again, including themselves. People think because I'm working with them, I'm protecting them. That's not what it is. I don't condone what they did. People did that with me. I did a lot of terrible things. They had to work with me to help me heal so that I would never hurt nobody. And I did it with my son. I did it with others. It's an important part of the work that's not part of the Western way of thinking, because the Western way of thinking is punishment and shame and removing them and never seeing them again and even killing them, death penalty, all the stuff that they do that just becomes so final. And we're always in the process of helping people become more of what they are. So I think it's an important part of the work. Call it transformative justice, restorative justice, call it peacemaker, whatever you want to call it. It's the work that I do. And if anybody understands, I want to make sure it's clear. I will work with predators if they're willing to. I'm not going to work with them if they're not. But if they are, we will take them through a process so that they get healed and they can heal what they've done. It may not always work, but that's the journey. And I can't tell you who some of these people are. I've worked with, 18th Street gang members who have killed a lot of people. I've worked with them when they're on the, like, talking about me in the ground. I had to go to the ground with a guy from El Salvador, 18th Street, who had murdered a lot of people. And I had to go to the ground with him with his pain. He carried all that pain, and he fell to the ground in so much pain, and I had to go down to the ground with him just to be with him. That's painful to have to do that, but you do that. So this young man would never do that again. People think it's not possible. I have seen those changes. I get it. Sometimes it isn't possible. Sometimes people don't get there. But that's the work that we do. It's not to protect predators. It's to protect our communities, to make sure that the men who have been narrowed and so mutated can become a fuller human being, even if they've done some terrible things in the past, that they cannot do them ever again. So that's the work I do. I want to make clear to people. So when they see me involved in this work, it's not to protect these people. I'm doing it so that they don't ever hurt again, and that they can leave a legacy or whatever you want to leave in the world that's more of the beauty and the truth and the goodness they have versus the terrible, awful things that they were capable or did do. People need to know that's the work. It's not protecting anybody. But I have to say that because Luis Rodriguez works with these terrible people and he's protecting them. No, but that's the Western way of thinking. If you don't put them in jail and punish them, then you're all messed up. That's not the way I look at it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Maestro Tello, did you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, and the reality is that, punishment doesn't work. Hurting somebody and criticizing and locking them up doesn't take away the pain, doesn't break the cycle. All it does is says, I want to hurt you because you hurt somebody else, right? And that's different than accountability. Accountability is part of healing. Accountability is the first process of healing is acknowledgement. Let's acknowledge what you did. Let's acknowledge, who you hurt. Let's acknowledge the imbalance in that. Let's acknowledge that first. If somebody's not willing to acknowledge it, well, you can't do no more healing. Okay, we're not going to place. But if you're willing to acknowledge that, and here's the thing, we get calls from abuelitas, we get calls from mamas, we get calls from hermanas, we get calls from wives, from ex-wives. Hey, help this dude because he's the father of my kids, and so. And I remember working in many systems with little chavalos, little boys, and I asked them, so who's the dad? And they say he doesn't have a dad. I said, that's biologically impossible. His dad may be locked up, may be deported, and if you don't work with the image of the dad and this little boy, he's got a hole about this big in his spirit that will never be resolved, right? So the thing is that part of healing is accountability, is acknowledgement, is accountability. And now it is, exploring what has brought you here. What has brought you to this place, and can we heal what has brought you here so that you don't pass on those wounds to the next generation? That, that's important. And the reality is, I'll be real straight up. I work, with people that are so wounded, deeply wounded, that it's not safe for them to be around people. And I will say that. And sometimes you have to say, no, you're not safe. Keep the court order that they can't see their kids. Keep the court order. And I have written because they're so wounded, And when I see people like that, I know the wounds are like 3-4 generations old. And many times they've been sexually abused. Many times they've been violated in many ways, and we don't talk about that with boys. We don't talk about that with men, the violation that has gone on in their lives. We rarely talk about that. But that's a very prevalent thing that nobody talks about, and those wounds are very deep. But those can be healed as well too, if you're willing, to go through the process and heal it. And so, because if not, trauma that is not transformed is going to get transferred. Let me say that again. Trauma not transformed gets transferred. So if Luis doesn't work with this, what's going to happen? That he's going to somebody else. He's going to another partner. He's going to see his kids. He's going to have some kind of influence, right? And what we learn in the barrio, You know, I mean, when I grew up in the barrio, if you hit a woman or violate a woman, the dudes in the neighborhood would go jack you up and say, "You don't be doing that." I mean, that was our role. We have to protect. If that means you're going to think of bad about us, if that means you're going to, pues, órale, I'm here protecting. You know, and so it's a very complex role many times, but the focus is healing, and accountability is part of healing. You know, and it's not an easy job to do because, you know, as Luis mentioned, as you saw, when you see violation, when you choose to be in the role of healing and movimiento and justice, it impacts you. You know, just like all this shit is impacting us right now. You know, because we care, because, you know, we know, because we feel, and you know, and we feel responsible. So all the stuff that's going on, that we see going on in the community, you know, está pesado, and it's, you know, it's affecting us all, you know, that way. You know, if I didn't have my ceremony, if I didn't have my, you know, the people around me that helped, you know, helps to heal me, or you know, bless me off, or fan me off, or just, you know, to hear me out, you know, I'd be a mess too. But fortunately, through the years, you know, Creator has brought certain pieces of my life, but also I have chosen to include certain ways in my life, and certain things I've taken out of my life. You know, when I grew up, my dad drank all the time. All the men drank, and I saw the drinking and all that stuff, what that did to our families. You know, the susto that came, the domestic violence. So I had to make a choice when I had my kids. You know, do I want to do that? And I chose, you know what? Alcohol can be part of my life. My kids have never seen me drink. That was a choice I made, right? To not transfer that trauma, to not transfer the suicide. And I'm not talking about people that, you know, they want to drink, have a beer, cerveza. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about that symbolically meant to me something very important. And I had to make that choice for me, you know, and I believe my kids are better off, you know, that way. But those are the kind of choices that you make individually, familially, your work and communities, you know, and it's not all praise and glory. You know, as Luis says, you know, we get criticized for, you know, why are you working with this dude? Why are you doing that work? Why, you know, está pesado, you know, and but you know, it's a work the Creator sent us to do, and we try and do it in the best way we can, you know, with the sacredness in mind.
Yeah, and I think that again that transitions into the next thing I wanted to ask you both about, because you're right. Like if you are operating off of this, what Leslie calls the paradigm, right, and this mindset that we have of here is how you address the problem, then yeah, those solutions of jail, imprisonment, ostracization, that makes sense. But I think that's something that's really impactful about the work that both of you do, is that you are rooted in those indigenous practices, those indigenous values. For me, when I grew up, that was not a conversation that I ever had with my family. We come from a part of Jalisco where my mom's hometown, a lot of the area is designated as like native land. But I couldn't tell you the name of the native tribes that lived in that area before colonization came. That just wasn't the conversations that I grew up with. And even in high school, that wasn't something that I had much exploration, or in college with my education, I didn't learn about these things. It wasn't until, again, I was meeting with Leslie and learning from Leslie about these conversations that she was able to introduce me to some of this. And so even I'd say I'm in the early stages of my decolonial journey and re-indigenal, how would you phrase it? Re-indigenizing my ways, you know? So I'm curious to hear from both of you. Again, you've been doing this for decades. What was it for you that introduced you into that space, into that realm where you were tapping into these indigenous practices and values that are so contrary to what we're used to seeing here in the West?
Maybe I'll throw myself in here now. You know, the Chicano movement was my opening to indigeneity. Can't even say it like you, but but it didn't get deep enough. You know, we were all Chicanos, we were indigenas, but we didn't really know a lot. I started dancing when I was 17 years old, believe it or not, but I didn't take it further. I didn't go deep enough. I didn't really get into it until really hard until I started sobering up, which is going to be 34 years this June that I've been sober completely. 7 years on heroin and other drugs, and then 20 years on top of that. And now I've been sober much longer than I've been not sober. And I realized when I went to AAA, and then I went to Rational Recovery and all these other they're good programs. I'm not even knocking them down. I still take people to meetings. Sometimes I will go to an NA meeting myself still. But the reason why I kind of didn't go that way was because I felt it was too Western oriented. It has value, but it wasn't, for some reason, it wasn't deep enough. And at the same time, I met this Chicano who had been on cocaine all years, and he was clean. Chicano. Well, he was in business. Can you imagine a Chicano that was actually in high-end business? But he was Chicano, and we met in the Native American Center there in Chicago because he was looking for his indigenous roots, and so was I. I came from the working class, completely, a former steel worker, lead foundry worker, and all kinds of carpenter. I did all that work, and then here he is. From the business side, but we were Chicanos looking for indigenous roots. He became my friend and teacher, who passed away, unfortunately. Frank Blasquez, I think, Jerry, you might know him from Albuquerque the last time, but we were in Chicago. And he helped open the door to the Mexica tradition, the indigenous way, but also the Red Row in general, because we went to the Native American Center. We met a lot of Lakotas, Ojibways, other tribes. We started going to Pine Ridge, me and him. We did ceremony, did vision quest there. I ended up on my own going to the Navajo. So between the indigenous people of the U.S. and then going back to my indigenous roots in Mexico, that was really important for me because I think it gave a depth to my recovery. And the main thing, there's two things I want to say about this. There's a lot I can say. But there's two things that I learned about the indigenous way of thinking. And these are the two things that people don't think about. One, two things could be true at the same time. People don't always think about that because we want a black and white. We want binaries all the time, everywhere. The Western culture is that, you one or the other, everything else. It was very great teaching for me that I could be a really faulty, angry, raging man. I could hurt people, but I could also be a very decent, good, authentic human being. They could both be true. And then if you know that, then you got to put your energies in one or the other. I was given the name of Toshli through the ceremonies with Frank Blasquez and Macuitoshu, who actually was my teacher there, and La Caela out of Mexico, who was our first Mexica teacher. We would bring him in from Mexico because he was such a very important teacher. And they gave me a name, Chico Metosle, 7 rabbit. But the Tosli represents a person, an energy that can magnify, augment things, from a lot of fertilization, But if you're not conscious or aware, you can augment terrible things or augment good things. You know what I'm saying? If you got that energy, you're going to augment things. You're going to magnify things. You're going to add more to the world. But then you got to be aware of that energy can go negative or positive. You got to make a decision. This is where your agency comes in. I have to decide I'm going to go this way. This is what they taught me. It was very powerful teaching. It was better than all the NAAA meetings. Again, I don't want to knock it down. It's just to let you know this is my personal journey. I had to learn. The other thing I learned is that you can't judge things in their static moment. You got to judge things in their motion. All of us are in motion, whether we know it or not. We're constantly growing. Our body's growing. Obviously, we're talking about gray hair. That wasn't that. When I first met Jerry, he wasn't like that. I wasn't like that. Look at us now. But, we're constantly, but if our bodies are in motion, so is our psyche. So is our souls. Everything's in motion. And you got to be able to look at things in their motion. That's why when I look at people, even murderers, I have to try to intuitively, but also a lot of ways, kind of diagnose. And I'm not a therapist, so I can't say that, but I have to still diagnose. Is this person in a place in his life that I can come in and help in an intervention way, help push him in the direction of that positive part of his life? The energies that he carries can be done in a positive way that could actually be helpful for himself, his family, and the community. That's what I have to diagnose. And generally, I can say that. That's why people misunderstand when I work with people. Like, for example, I've written in my second memoir, It Calls You Back, my dad, I didn't know this till I was an adult, was molesting my sisters. It tore me up. It tore up the whole family. The family never healed from this when it came out. And it came out because one of my youngest sisters saw my dad try to molest my daughter. She was a little girl. He was a pedophile. I didn't know this growing up. I wasn't even home. I got kicked out at 15 years old. So I wasn't, in fact, my sister, the one that found him, got mad at me one time as an adult. I got mad at you because you weren't home when he was doing this to me. And you could have protected me. You're the only one that stood up to my parents. And I said, I didn't know. I really didn't understand. I didn't know. He didn't molest me and my brother. I didn't know. It was hurtful. But she got mad at me. He said, you weren't there. You could have. It was really sad. And then when she opened it all up, it just tore the family up. And I had her come in there. And I came in there really angry again, raging. I was going to shoot my dad, But I also had moved myself away from that. So I had a girlfriend who was a therapist, and she was very helpful, I have to say. And she told me, dude, you're not going to be the hero of the family. You're not going to save the family. Quit this fantasy. She was right. You want to be the hero. Now I'm going to go kill my dad because that's going to save the family. You're not going to save nobody. Help your sister. Help yourself. Help the people that need to be helped. And if you can help your dad, do that. My dad never got healed, never got over it. But I will tell you that in my book, you'll see that I had to say to him, before he died, he had stomach cancer and he was dying. And my mom, Terca that she is, says, you got to talk to him? No, I don't want to talk to him. Let him go to hell. That's what I said. I said, no, you got to talk to him. Sure enough, she put the phone to his ear, and I thought I was going to send him off with maldiciones. Man, all the bad words. I think I told you guys this story. But anyway, I don't mind sharing it because it's in my book. But I had to tell him, Dad, I love you. Can you imagine? He never told me that ever in his life. But I told him that because for some reason, a part of me, inside of me, whatever grace I could have, it wasn't about him, it was about me. That was what I needed to let him know. If you go into the ancestor realm, go with love. Stay with love. The love you couldn't give to us, but that's okay. Because he never had love. Whatever went through his life that made him this distorted human being. And I didn't leave him off the hook. He will always be known for what terrible things he did to my sisters, and he tried to do my daughter. You know what I'm saying? There's accountability. But at the same time, there's a part of you that has to take it to another level. And that's what I learned from my indigenous teachers. And I can tell you more things, but I want to add those two things. Watch things in their motion, but also know that two things could be true at the same time, so that you know how to work with people. And again, I want to let people know, I love what Jerry's saying about accountability, because accountability is also an account, not accountability like, here's a ledger and this is what you owe, but more like account the story, the missing story. Maybe the story's missing, whatever, or in the fullness of stories. It's important to get those stories as accountability. What is the story that made this person who he is? And how can that story be taken further so he's never that person again? And again, that's kind of how I want to be able to see it. That's what the indigenous teaching ceremony and the rituals have helped me in the red road that I've been on and Jerry's been on. It's helped me understand to always remember those teachings. But those two things I want to bring in now.
Well, thank you, Luis. Thank you. I want to just point out the sacred healing that Luis just did right there. And he talked about, which side do you feed? Which side do you lean on? Because that's the side that grows. And even though the side of his dad was so big in terms of that painful, wounded, ugly side, I mean, it was overwhelming. It took up the whole picture. Luis still saw a little sliver right there. And he decided, let me water that love. In spite of any, let me just water that right there. And when you do that, it opens up a portal. It opens up a portal, not only healing for your dad, but for you and for the other generations. Because the ancestors then step through that little portal right there and bring all that medicine so that his sisters and his daughter, whoever else needs to heal from that, can heal. Right. And so to me, that's the strength of true manhood. That's the strength of sacred manhood. You don't do what's easy. You don't do what's expected. You do what's appropriate to the healing of your generation and the next generations. And it's not easy. Hell no, it's not easy. The second thing that I want to mention to you, Fernando, is that you mentioned that when you grew up, you didn't know a lot about these teachings or your indigenous past and all of that. And I just want to mention that there's a knowing, I mean, your head knowing, you know your lineage and where they're from, and the people and your abuelitas, and you met your grandpa and you met your, that's a knowing, right? But there's another knowing in your spirit, right? And I want to say to you, know your ancestors. They know you, right? They know you. They're in you, right? So you don't have to know in order to know. You don't have to know in the head in order to know in your spirit. And many of us feel we need to have all this knowledge and do the genealogy, ancestry, toda la fregada, to know this. It's in you. And sometimes all it takes is just sitting, lighting some medicine, say, ancestors, come teach me. Come sit with me. Help me heal this. I don't know what to do here. Tell me, guide me, create some space. See, and that's why society wants to fill us up with all these things to do, all this, be on your phone, do all this stuff, because it clogs everything. Because they know if we sit in that prayer, sit in that ceremony, oh my gosh, things are going to come through us. And, and for me, part of this path, and I've come to realize that my grandmother knew these teachings. My mama, the homies understood. They knew these teachings. I didn't identify them as indigenous. I didn't identify them that way, but they were there all along, right there in Compton and Watts. They were right there the whole time. That's why we got through. That's how we got through, man. I mean, I remember being at parties, and being at these parties, and some shit was gonna jump down, and you got this feeling. Where did that feeling come? You got a feeling, oh shit, it was cool right then, but you got a feeling, oh shit, something's gonna come down here, and you either paid attention to that ancestral feeling or not. And I pay, fool, let's go, man. What? Nah, man, I got a feeling. Come on, fool, it's a good party. Look at that high. Hey, I'm out of here. And I left. And the dudes that not got shot up and shit. I mean, those ancestral feelings were there. They speak to you, and all of us have been. I remember coming home. I was and smoked up a little bit too much, drank too much, driving the car. I see a red light behind me, and should I begin to pray, God, please don't. You make promises, and the cop car goes around you. I'm at another stop sign. I see another cop car. I promised to even go to confession. I'll go to confession to you. Just don't stop me. And I get home, and I think, well, fuck, I was lucky, man. Shit. And I walk in the house, and my mom's praying there. Okay, mijo, I can go to sleep now. I mean, so these teachings, that the medicine and the energy and the prayers and all of that are real. They're alive, But where it came to me is, I began working at this organization. Actually, it was a new funded organization called El Centro Mental Health in East LA. And it was in the 1970s when they got a huge funding for Chicano mental health, right? And they hired a bunch of raza, people from Mexico, from all over, Spanish-speaking people. And there's about 100 of us that were hired as the first Chicano mental health organization in the nation. The thing that we didn't accept, we thought, oh, sure, we're going to become raza and all our people and everything. What we didn't understand is that in order to keep funding, we had to bill according to Western society. We had to diagnose according to what you had to do, everything according. And so even though we're a bunch of raza, we couldn't do it in our way. We had to do it their way and according to their paperwork and their diagnosis and shit. So what ended up happening is there was and I want to get acknowledged to this psychiatrist, indigenous-based psychiatrist, Arnaldo Solis, who was around at that time. And a number of us came together. And we established our own, we called Calmecac de Aztlán en Los. And we began meeting every Tuesday night, exploring the codices, and then we brought people, Florencio Yescas, Andrés Segura, some of the wisdom teachers, the indigenous people, and began to study with them. And we began to realize this exactly what I'm telling you. We have this medicine in us. Our people, generations wrote about this. They talked about this. They lived this, right? And then through that, we began doing ceremonias back in the 70s. And we began to meet Ernie Longwalker, right? And Jose Montoya and some of the other, and that's where my first sweat lodge was that way. And I remember Ernie Long Walker Peters, man, he would say, you guys, you Chicanos, you don't know who the hell you are. You need to find out who you are, find your own ceremony, So I'll let you sort me now, but you got to find out, and he really, he was on our ass. And, and that really kind of spearheaded us to find our own ways and our own teachings. But, but what I began to understand is that there was different between intervention and treatment and healing. What they taught us to do, what they taught me to do as a therapist is intervention and treatment, which is okay. Sometimes you need that. That's what Luis was talking about. Go to AA or NA. Okay, it'll get you from stop using or stop drinking, but it doesn't take care of the wound, right? And when I realized that there was another dimension, there was a spiritual dimension. So in Western society, they teach you about the cognitive, behavioral, physical, mental, but there's two other dimensions, emotional, spiritual, right? And it is our ceremonies, it is our ways, our valores, our memories, our ancestors that help us unravel the pain that has come at a deep emotional level, and then instruct us in that spiritual level, and gives us tools and ways in which we can sanar ourselves. That sana culita rana si no sana doy, all of those things. And that's the reason why I began to write children's books. I began to write children's books because I wanted to teach that to my kids. I wanted to teach them stories, because when I grew up, there were no stories about us. We couldn't even, Goldilocks and Three Bears, what the hell? I don't know what Goldilocks, and eating porridge, what the hell is porridge? I didn't know that, So I flipped it and wrote a book called Trenzas Bonitas in the Barrio Bears, and Papa Bears eating frijoles de arroz. I mean, you begin to write what you need, and nobody's teaching you, just do this stuff, And I believe, that Luis's writings and my writings were out of, we want our families to know our stories, and to know there is that road, and to acknowledge that we have stories too, we have medicine too, and so that the medicine, the indigenous way, is really our story. And at the same time, straight up, my grandma went to church and, went to Catholic church and said the rosary, and we had to say the rosary of her. And I struggled with that for a long time until, Maestro Montoya says, Creator's every place. Wherever you pray, you can pray. Don't matter. And I've prayed with all dimensions of people from different, and it doesn't matter. We in our círculos, we have people from all over, and you welcome and you come in a good way. And that's part of healing, is separating those lines, those divisions. That we can have palabra with a lot of different people that way. And, and still learning and still sharing and just acknowledge all those teachers that have, come before and continue to be in our lives, that way, those that heal us and instruct us.
Yeah, thank you both. I wanted to add, Maestro Teo, you were talking about how a lot of the practices that maybe were lost, or maybe that weren't like explicitly taught to us, that we still see them in our families, we still see them in our communities. My friend Samuel Azalde, one of the questions he wanted to ask was, like in the Chicano community, in the gang community even, you see some of these like practices maybe unconsciously or consciously being brought back, like in the prisons, people learning to speak Nahuatl, or just a lot of that indigenous imagery being incorporated in the tattoos and the arts and stuff like that. Can you maybe just like a real brief, like where did both of y'all see those practices being incorporated in the ways that our community shows up?
Yeah, I saw it, of course, in the pintas. When we were in the gangs, the iconography was mostly Catholico. The crosses and the Jesus and the Virgens, and we had all those tattoos, But then I started seeing, when I was going to the pintas, I started seeing all these Mexica, and I started questioning, okay, why? What are you guys doing this? I first heard Mexica Tiawi in the prison. I didn't even hear it in the community. I didn't know what Mexica Tiawi was. It was the prisoners teaching me Mexica Tiawi, which means forward, or gente, forward, move forward. And wow, I was learning from them. But again, I think what I like about what Jerry's saying is that there's a depth that we have to get through. I'm all for that, but I mean, I think the problem is that anything that's good can be misused. And I started seeing that in the prisons, and I don't mind saying it because a lot of people know it. It got misused. It was good that they were learning Nahuatl, but they were learning it up to a point, and they were learning it to some of them to just do whatever criminal acts they wanted to do. I saw what was going on. But I also saw a lot of guys in the pintas really wanted to get to the depths. They weren't all about that, and I know they would come to me because I had learned some of these ways. They wanted to know, teach us more about the Mexica cosmology, the cosmovision. They wanted to know, and I learned a lot from people, like some of the people that he mentioned, that Jerry mentioned. We had a capuli too in Chicago. We had the first capuli ever. Now there's hundreds of them. I don't know how many hundreds, but there's a lot of them. We were working with the only danza group in Chicago, Violin. Now there's several. And I know because my son lives in Chicago, he's a danzante. So now he's doing danza with some groups there. But when we were doing it, me and Frank and we were the only ones, Chicanos, that were doing it, man. And the Native American Center was helping us, but we were doing the Mexica way, learning more about this. So I would say that it's important to not just have the tattoos and not just have some of it, but get to the depth that Jerry's talking about. The healing part is so important. And I say this too for even people who are in the politics, in the anti-ICE things, the abolition movement, all this thing. Always remember that we're in revolutionary times. I think we have to be revolutionary in our thinking. But remember that one of the most revolutionary things we can do is to heal. That healing is a revolutionary act, which is why I think this system does everything it can to stop us from actually going to the depths of healing that Jerry is talking about. We bring it up and we keep raising it. I bring it up to people that nobody wants to bring it up, in the pre-pintas, in the juvenile facilities, in the streets. And I know the pressure to not do that. It's almost like it's okay to react. It's okay to take on the system. But the healing part of it, because our own personal healing is also connected to the healing that our society needs. There's a big wound in this world. It isn't just a wound within us. It's a wound in the world, from colonialism, from capitalism, from fascism, from all the things that have happened over the last 500 or 600 years, and even before that, when class society started. You know what I mean? Even before that, we have to heal the big wound in the planet, in the soul of the earth, which is a living being for indigenous people. You know what I mean? So when we heal, we help the healing of the world, but also, as Jerry points out, it's the ancestral realm that we draw on, because they're also healing as we're healing. Everything is working on a healing level. It keeps going higher and higher. Even the ancestors are looking for healing. That's one of my indigenous teachers were saying. They said, look, we bring in the ancestors because they're looking for healing too. And they come when we're healing because that calls them. Wherever somebody's going to healing, they're there. They show up. You don't even have to call them. They show up because you're actually doing real healing. They love that. That's what he would say. And so I learned that it's important that we're healing all the way through. But let's make healing part of the political work, that revolutionary work, the aspects of the work that we're trying to change things, because I think transformation is such an important word. I'm glad Jerry brought it up, because it's not just change. Change happens all the time. Transforming, I think me and Fernando, you and me talked about this. It's a change in the forms to liberate the content. Our spirit needs to be constantly liberated because we got chains put in on us. It's liberated the day we're born. And then these chains fall in, chains of familial, patriarchal stuff, whatever it might be. Could be chains of the community, the oppression, the discrimination, and everything. It could be even chains of the gang life, the criminal life, whatever the chains that fall into you. But even religion could be a change. Chains, I'm talking about chains, not change. The CHAINS, they become chains on our spirits. And we got to know how to get rid of them to liberate the spirit constantly. And that's the ongoing struggle that even as we get older, we have to transform. The forms have to go, and the spirit has to keep getting liberated. But that also includes the spirit of our communities, the spirit of the earth, all of this. We got to keep transforming things so that the forms that have held them back are gone, and the liberating spirit keeps moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Luis. Some of the very simplest things are very sacred. So and we grew up in the valley, so pues órale, right? Just that sense of órale. A lot of people don't realize that orar means to pray, right? So if you say órale, I pray for you, bro. So we're greeting each other with prayer. Even the vatos in the street don't understand that. The essence of órale, órale. And you can say, órale is like órale, Orale, I mean, the inflection of the voice changes what the orale means. But at the root of it is, I'm praying for you. We're in prayer together. We're so the greeting, and one of the sacred things that we always is greeting. We greet each other. If you don't greet each other, something's wrong. I mean, and even in my travels, I'm sure Luis in his travels too, because, for many, many years, we were the only raza out there doing this, speaking. And I would go into places in which there was one or two people that looked like me, and then, but white people, and you walk in a room, and it's just part of the traditional ways. You walk in the room and you check out the room, and if you see one person that looks like you, you dip your head like that. That's like that. Say, hey, orale, okay, you got my back, I got your back. So those are some very symbolic things of just a dip of the head, just an acknowledgement. What's up? That means I got you. Those are really important things of connection, that the subtle things, the other thing that, we have to recognize is there was a lot of really rooted things that kept our families together, that kept the essence of who we were, that have been withered away and destroyed over the years, and intentionally by society. If Luis mentioned language. Our language is real important. In order for me to talk to my abuelita, I had to speak in Spanish. But if they take that away and shame you of that, then you become ashamed of your grandma too. You don't think she knows anything, right? And now you've taken away a really, really important thing of respect for elders. Right? We don't respect, and before, when we grew up, even if we had pleito, if Luis and I were from different clicas and we have pleito, if there's a viejita around, we say, hey man, let's take it over here. We don't want to hurt the viejita. Now, nobody cares about that. The viejitas, they'll hurt. I mean, those are things that have been taken away from children too. The kids get, quitas aquí, cabrón, get out of here. So you didn't get high, didn't do that around the little kid. There were a lot of little things that were rules in our families, even in the craziness of the barrio warfare and all that. There still were rules, but after you wither and wither away, now our barrios don't have those rules. There's no checks and balances. There's none of that there, right? And that's what we're dealing with now. We're dealing with, okay, how do we reground? How do we reinfuse? How do we reintegrate the sacredness that is really who we really are, not who we become, who we really are, right? And so that essence of then reintegrating that and reintroducing that is really a reformulation, a transformation, if you will, of who we really are. And I think that's the process, of sacred manhood. The work that we do at National Comadres, we have curriculums on Joven Noble, on Cari Corazón, on even on Girasol for the women. And I don't want to leave the mujeres out of this. The mujeres are such a significant part of, and the reality is every major revolution was stimulated by a woman's voice and a woman's direction. We wouldn't be here without that from the beginning to even our transformation. So I want to acknowledge, the mujer but we have to do our own work. And the work that we're doing, it's a parallel work to what Luis is doing, is we're for these youngsters, teaching them really what does palabra mean? What does hombre noble mean? What does it mean? Because they get a distorted sense of that, even in the community, even the barrio. And even looking back, Chicano movement, it was very strong and all of that. And, but the whole sense of spirituality was not there. And the whole sense of healing was not there. And we have running the risk of even now, of our, advocacy and marching and all of that, if it doesn't contain the healing, because we get angry and we get rage, right? And if we don't, and you get in those, I've been in those marches, and you have these feelings. If you're intuitive at all, you got all this stuff and you're pissed off and stuff like that. If you don't do like you did, Fernando, and do something to cleanse and limpiar, you take it home. Or you take it someplace else, and now it's puro pleito, and we're seeing that even in our communities too. Even the organizations that are advocating más just están peleando uno con otro, And so the healing is really important, even for our movimiento, even for the work that we're doing now. And I remember many, many times, growing up, we didn't have nothing to eat, man. When my brother got locked up, we were the barrios were after us, We had to turn the lights out in the front of the house. We were in the back room because they were going to shoot up our house, and we were scared, and what did we rely on? Prayer. Mamita said, Mico, va a estar bien, it's going to be about, hi, Grandma, what? And then, no te preocupes, it's going to be okay. You just stay in this prayer. You keep living a good way. You keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. Y todo va a estar, what, Grandma, how? What's going to happen? We had no hope, right? Our hope was those prayers. Our hope was that ceremony. Our hope sometimes are those songs. Our hope sometimes is lighting that medicine. Our hope is somebody praying for you because you're so traumatized you can't pray for yourself. So you need somebody else to pray for you, somebody else to fan you off, somebody to take care of you, somebody to feed you. That's where community comes in, right? That sometimes people are hurting so much they barely have enough just to get by, just to think, shit, let me just live another day, because sometimes it gets so heavy you want to take yourself out. You need somebody else to remind you, no, we need you, don't give up, I'm here for you, and that's part of that revolution that Luis talks about. The part of the revolution is hope. How do we, in spite of all this shit, in spite of the injustice, in spite of the inequity, in spite of these pendejos that have no interest in us, they've been trying to get rid of us from the beginning, trying to erase us from the beginning, and it's still going. Historically, it happened in the 20s, it happened in the 40s. This is not new. But, the thing is, the Sexto Sol, the prophecy of our people says, we are the leaders of the healing for the world. Indigenous people, we are. If we don't heal the world, it's not going to heal. So this is a challenge to us too. We need to bring that medicine, live that medicine, and figure out how we can get through it in the best way we can, with the least wounds that we can, pero juntos. En la quech, que tú eres mi otro yo, that blessing of working together that way.
I'd want to direct this to maybe people in positions of influence and power, because I feel like that's where we see a lot of shortcomings.
Yeah.
And I feel like the people who are maybe not in positions of power will definitely resonate with everything that y'all shared today. But I wonder if you have a message maybe directly just for those people who are in a position where they can influence things, where they can move the needle and fight back in a way that the everyday people might not have that same influence.
Well, I would encourage anybody, especially for those that have leadership positions of organizations or even trying to be in the political realm, which I think are important, is to align with community. Our community is our mother. And sometimes people who get into those politics, it tends to remove you from that. You start getting into a dynamic that has nothing to do with community. It's about keeping things in place, keeping yourself safe, all these things that politicians have to face. I think it's important to be true to your community, be authentic yourself, but also align with what community is at and what it needs. So I would call on anybody that takes on those positions, but also any leadership position. You're not alone. There's no such leader. If you don't have community, you're not a leader. And community is really the leader. You know what I'm saying? And if community is your mother, you got to get nurtured. You got to go back to community. You got to get fed by community. Community is going to give you what you need. If you disconnect from that, you're not really a leader. And so anyway, let me just put that out there to keep people connected with community.
I would say that this Western society works in a hierarchical sense where the leaders are on the top. In our true indigenous way, we're in círculo, where you're one member. You're one person in that círculo. So as leaders, make sure you're part of a círculo. Make sure you're part of a community círculo. And I really appreciate Luis mentioning the community as the mother. Sit in that círculo and do your own work too. But then listen. Listening is one of the most powerful medicines that we have. Listen and absorb and really, if you're really a representative of that community, then you're going to represent their voice, their spirit, their fears, their needs. And then my dad would say, palabras sin acción no vale para nada. So you can give all the words you want, but if you don't put it to action, whatever you hear, whatever the needs are, then use your power to put it into action. But the source has to come from that círculo. Has to come that way. And what you will realize is the community will take care of you. When they see that you represent them, they will take care of you. Not just politically, but personally, they will take care of you. And your life will be better. and you will get bendiciones, and you will get blessing, not just you, your family, and the next generation. So that's to me, that sense of of acknowledging, the role, the sacred role that each of us carry. And I want to leave us because you mentioned some of the focus on manhood. I want to challenge the men in our communities to reach out. Before there was no resources, we didn't have any place to go. Now you got places to go. There's Tia Chuchas, there's, you can call National Comadres Network, Barrios Unidos, you have a whole bunch of organizations and places, that, you could do Brown Fatherhood, I mean, there's a lot of places now that you can go if you want to be better. My little grandson, when I play with him, sometimes we play, we want to go outside and play together, tata. I say, you mean together? No, together. And what I understood from his together is a deeper level. And then after we play, I said, how did I do, Miko? You did good, but tomorrow maybe you do a little bit better. So, and I get that direction from my grandson, that every day, let's try and do just a little bit better as men, a little bit better as fathers, as grandfathers, as sons, as partners, That's our goal. So, and if you need help to do a little bit better so that you can be together with your relations, reach out. There are resources out there in places, that will help you that way. And I want to thank you and, the ancestors and everybody. Luis, brother, I love you and thank you for your work. And, say hi to Trini, and all the relatives, that way. And, and Leslie and todos, anybody in the community, aquí estamos, para ayudar, check out our books and our establishments, and we're here para servirles.
Thank you, Maestro. Well, again, thank you both for all this wisdom that y'all shared with us, for everything that you've shared about your experiences. Please, if for anybody watching, if this is the first time you've heard from these two gentlemen, please look at their books, that's Maestro Tello mentioned. Look at their websites. I'll put some resources in the description and all that. But yeah, thank you very much. And Luis, I'll give you the last word here.
Well, I just want to give thanks, Latsukamati, and Ometeo, just to bring in all the energies of the universe, the feminine and masculine energies, but also the spectrum of them, that we have to draw on things that are bigger than us, but also part of us. So, gracias. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jerry, always. Mi carnal.